Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Kenzie Chin, and I am the Coordinator of Educator Preparation here at DESE. And I'm joined by my colleagues today, Lindsay Zorich and Sadie Sagov. We're very excited to be here today to talk about the updates to the PSTs and the Candidate Assessment of Performance. This session is specifically for supervising practitioners and district partners who are in the PK-12 realm. We're really excited to be offering this opportunity for you to learn more directly from DESE about what these updates are, where they fit into our vision, and how they apply to you. The objective today is to learn about the updates to the professional standards for teachers and the Candidate Assessment of Performance in order to support implementation during the 25-26 academic year. The agenda today will be that we'll talk about what are the PSTs in CAP, an overview of the PSTs and essential elements. We will go over the updated CAP process. We'll talk about some of those specifics that are important to supervising practitioners. So we'll talk about quality, scope, and consistency as it applies to the CAP rubric. An emphasis on high quality feedback. That's really part of the updated CAP. Modifications to the CAP data submission for school year 25, which is this year, and an overview of the plan for implementation supports, and then a Q&A at the very end. Okay, so as always, we want to start today's session with our team's beliefs about educator preparation and the students across Massachusetts. We believe all students can thrive. We believe all students deserve access to effective educators. We believe through strong preparation, all educators can be effective on day one. We believe all educators must support each and every student in their care. We believe students are best supported when families, communities, and educators work together. We believe DESE sponsoring organizations and PK-12 schools and districts will need to take action to disrupt inequities. We believe DESE sponsoring organizations and PK-12 schools and districts will need to partner to build an education system that lives up to these beliefs. These beliefs have informed all of the way that we think about these revisions and the revisions themselves, and are really integral to the way that we think about our work together. And now I'm going to hand it off to Lindsay to talk about what the PSTs and CAP are.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lindsay Zorich. I'm the Assistant Director of Educator Preparation here at DESE. Today, we're going to be giving an overview of the changes that have been made to the PSTs and CAP over the last year, but knowing that we have folks with a range of experience and levels of familiarity with the PSTs and CAP, we want to first start with an overview of what those are and how they're used and how they fit in with our broader vision. These updates to the PSTs and CAP fit in well with our mission to improve alignment within our guidance within educator effectiveness and across DESE regarding what it means to have effective practice. The standards of effective practice define effective practice for teachers and for leaders and span across a teacher's career from preparation into the beginning years of the classroom during their induction and mentoring and into their continuous improvement as they continue to develop throughout their career. As many of you likely know, the model educator evaluation rubrics have been updated over the last several years. Those updates were informed from several years of input from educators, students, family members, district leaders, unions, advisory groups, internal to DESE and external from DESE, who made it very clear that those rubrics and how we were defining effective practice needed revision in order to center equity and culturally and linguistically sustaining practices. After those educator evaluation rubrics were updated, it was necessary to align the PSTs with those updates. The PSTs are directly informed from, and in fact, the language is explicitly copied over from the standards of effective practice so that we're ensuring that common expectation. Then, because the CAP essential elements are a subset of the PSTs, updates to the candidate assessment and performance were also needed. We needed to update CAP specifically because of the PSTs, but it was also an opportunity to address some feedback that we had gotten in those first few years of implementation with CAP. Additionally, the guidelines for educator preparation program approval were released in 2023, which shared new criteria requiring alignment back to the PSTs to ensure that the expectations at the organization and program level around culturally and linguistically sustaining practices and other evidence-based practices were reflected in what we're expecting our teachers to practice and demonstrate. The changes were also needed in order to align with DESE's educational vision, which was also released in summer of 2023. If you haven't seen DESE's educational vision yet, this is a snapshot of it. And Sadie or Kenzie will drop the link in the chat so that you can see the full document. Our educational vision is that as a result of their public education in Massachusetts, students will attain academic knowledge and skills, understand and value themselves, understand and value others, and engage with the world so that they can be curious and creative, finding joy in their learning, pursuing their interests, and using innovative thinking to approach opportunities and solve challenges. Shape their path so they're well prepared to thrive in college and or their career, and that they're positioned for lifelong learning, that they feel connected, seeing themselves as valuable and involved members of their communities, and being aware of both their independence and their interdependence, and that our students can be empowered to play a role in advocating for equity, justice, and liberty in their communities and beyond. Alongside the vision, in order to achieve that vision, DESE identified 3 strategic objectives. Our office, the Office of Educator Effectiveness, primarily works in strategic objective number 3, which is creating a diverse and effective workforce. So that's to develop and sustain a workforce that is diverse, culturally responsive, well prepared, and committed to continuous improvement, so that all students have equitable access to effective educators. In order to be working towards strategic objective 3, making revisions to the PSTs and of course the standards of effective practice are really critical to ensuring that we do have that, that workforce that is diverse, culturally responsive, and well prepared. As we went through the updates to the PSTs and CAP, our office had a few goals that we were working towards. First is to align the PSTs and CAP with the updated standards of effective practice. We were also looking to identify differentiated levels of practice for the PSTs that aligned with both input from the field, both folks from educator preparation programs and folks from pre-K-12 schools and districts, along with families and community members, and that those levels of practice were also aligned with research on how educators develop culturally and linguistically sustaining practices, particularly as novice educators. We hope to ensure that CAP is meaningful across a range of practicum settings and balancing the CAP requirements against the flexibilities that really allow for meaningful implementation for each teacher candidate. And then supporting sponsoring organizations to prepare candidates to be ready to well serve all students, especially those from systemically marginalized groups and communities as their novice educators in the workforce. Further define the PSTs, there are 2 sets of expectations that make up what Massachusetts believes makes an effective educator. Those are content knowledge and pedagogical skills, which of course are very intertwined. Our content knowledge expectations are for teacher licensure rather, are established through the subject matter knowledge guidelines and assessed through coursework and through the MTEL. Our pedagogical skill expectations are established through the professional standards for teachers, or the PSTs, and are assessed through coursework and then ultimately by the candidate assessment of performance to ensure that folks are ready to teach upon completion of their programs. This is a quick orientation to the PSTs. If you open the PSTs document, you'll see that it's organized by standards, indicators, and elements. The 4 standards are identified with Roman numerals, which align with how they're identified throughout the standards of effective practice. These articulate the broad categories of practice necessary for educators to disrupt patterns of inequity and well serve Massachusetts' richly diverse student bodies. The indicators are labeled with a capital letter. These outline the knowledge, skills, and behaviors that make up effective practice within each standard. The elements are labeled with Arabic numerals, and each indicator includes between 1 and 4 elements that define the specific knowledge, skills, and behaviors that make up effective practice within the indicator. The differentiated practice level is indicated with an A in a gray box with a bold blue border. And each element has a distinct level of practice geared towards supporting teacher candidates' development throughout their educator preparation experience. The Massachusetts Candidate Assessment of Performance, or CAP, is designed to provide a mechanism for teacher candidates to receive high-quality feedback from their supervising practitioner and program supervisor related to the PSTs. It's also designed so that by the end of CAP, the supervising practitioner and program supervisor are able to assess the overall readiness of the teacher candidate. The structure of CAP also creates an intentional bridge from preparation to practice by aligning the expectations and the process for educator evaluation between preparation and in-service educators. This allows sponsoring organizations to ensure that teacher candidates have the most relevant skills and knowledge necessary to be effective educators in Massachusetts. And I'll pass it back to Kenzie.
Thanks, Lindsay. So now I'm going to launch into some of the updates that were made to the PSTs and CAP. The PST document is pretty extensive. So again, in this session, I won't go into all the specific changes that were made. I'll go in a little bit deeper than some of the details that I went to for the SO specific sessions that we've done in the past couple of weeks, but it's still going to be sort of thematic level. So the PSTs were updated so that evidence-based, culturally and linguistically sustaining practices supporting deeper learning for all students are integrated throughout. Practice levels are differentiated by element, not by indicator. And updated definitions for introduce, practice, and demonstrate better clarify both the connections across levels of practice and the distinct expectations for elements at each level. So we've already talked a little bit about how cultural and linguistically sustaining practices were integrated through CAP by way of the standards of effective practice. So I'll go into the second bullet, which is differentiating by the practice levels. So essentially, we expanded the language to better describe each of the practice levels in the PSTs. So now the expectation for introduce is that candidates exhibit a foundational understanding of key concepts and skills through coursework and or in early field-based experiences. So examples of that would include readings, observations, assignments, or assessments that expose candidates to the theoretical and practical aspects of the element. Practice, the definition is that candidates are introduced to and then actively engage in opportunities to apply the concepts and skills that they've learned. The candidates have opportunities to practice the skills, be observed by instructors or field supervisors, and obtain feedback. And opportunities would include, examples would include opportunities in coursework and or field-based experiences like simulations, rehearsals, role plays, one-on-one, small group or in whole group instruction, and field placements, planning and data meetings, engagement with the school community. The definition for demonstrate is now that candidates practice and are ultimately able to demonstrate proficiency in the concepts and skills that they've acquired. They're able to apply their knowledge and skills in various situations, including in field-based experiences. Their application of the concepts and skills meets established standards. They are able to demonstrate the concepts and skills without the need for significant guidance or support, though they still may be developing the scope and consistency for the expected for the essential elements. And we'll talk a little bit more about quality, scope, and consistency a little bit later too. Examples of demonstrate include building on prior opportunities to practice and receive feedback. So a one-on-one, small group or whole group instruction and field placements, planning and data meetings, engagement with school community. And then the last one is essential elements. So as Lindsay said, these are elements that are a part of CAP that are built off of the PSTs. So they're a subset of the elements that are at the demonstrate level. They are practices and skills assessed through the candidate assessment of performance. Each essential element was selected in part because the knowledge and skills it describes serve as an umbrella to other elements within the PSTs. And candidates must meet the established readiness thresholds for quality, scope, and consistency for each essential element to be deemed ready to teach in their practice. And examples include building opportunities to practice and demonstrate. They should be demonstrated in appropriate settings across the candidate's practicum experience. So now we'll talk a little bit more about the specific essential elements. I apologize for sort of pushing through all of these and going through them in detail. It is a little bit of a slog, but I'm going to push through because people have said that it's helpful to just hear them out loud and look at the differences. And I'm somebody who likes to be able to hear them and read them at the same time. So I'm just going to read through the new essential elements and you can look at how they compare to the old essential element. So this first essential element is subject matter knowledge. The new essential element reads, demonstrates sound knowledge of the subject matter by using evidence-based pedagogical practices that enable all students to develop and apply grade level knowledge and skills in relevant and real-world contexts, supporting students to make connections between the subject matter and real-world issues with impact on their communities and their world, and understanding the difference between social and academic language and the importance of this difference in planning, differentiating, and delivering effective instruction for English learners at various levels of English language proficiency and literacy. We're not going to take the time in this moment, in this info session right now, to talk about how they differ from the old essential elements, but I could see that being a productive activity. The next essential element is adjustments to practice. The new essential element here reads, uses analysis and conclusions from a wide range of assessment data and feedback from colleagues, students, and families to adjust practice and implement differentiated and scaffolded supports for improved and more equitable student learning outcomes. The third essential element here is, supports all students to meet or exceed high expectations for grade appropriate standards aligned learning, produce high quality work, and develop self-awareness and skills for independent learning by using evidence-based, culturally and linguistically sustaining instructional practices to provide equitable opportunities for grade level learning, providing flexible and responsive supports, scaffolds, and tools to meet students' needs, communicating clear criteria for success, for example, models, rubrics, exemplars, and reinforcing perseverance and effort with challenging content and tasks. The next essential element actually changed. It was meeting diverse needs, and now it's inclusive instruction. And inclusive instruction is that the candidate accommodates and supports individual differences in all students' learning needs, abilities, interests, and levels of readiness, including those of students with disabilities in accordance with relevant IEPs or 504 plans, English learners and former English learners, academically advanced students, and students who have been historically marginalized by using appropriate inclusive practices such as tiered supports, educational and assistive technologies, scaffolded instruction, and leveraging students' native language and linguistic resources to make grade level content accessible and affirming for all students, and providing students with multiple ways to learn content and demonstrate understanding. The next essential element is safe learning environment. The new essential element is that the candidate creates and maintains a safe, supportive, and inclusive environment by establishing with student input, classroom routines, and systems to support student learning, modeling and reinforcing respect for and affirmation of differences related to background, identity, language, strengths, and challenges, self and social awareness, supporting student accountability for the impact of their actions, enabling students to take academic risks and share ideas freely, and seeking feedback from students on their experiences of the classroom learning environment and making aligned adjustments to practice. So this next essential element, collaboration on student learning and well-being, the story is slightly different in how it came to be part of our essential elements. It's not adapted from one that is currently there. But over the course of the past several years, 8-ish years of CAP's original implementation, we had a lot of voices from both the prep field and PK-12. That standard 3 in the standards of effective practice, which is family and community engagement, absolutely needed to be a part of the essential elements. We heard this from people across the spectrum, from teachers who felt like they needed to have acquired these skills in their prep program, administrators feeling like incoming teachers they wished had stronger skills in this area, and prep programs wishing that they had the leverage to integrate this kind of education into their program. And after a lot of deliberation with the PST and CAP working group, which helped us to decide which of the essential elements would be essential elements, collaboration on student learning and well-being rose to the top of standard 3 as the element that would be the most impactful to raise as an essential element. The essential element is that the candidate partners with families to support students' learning and well-being by leveraging families' cultural and linguistic knowledge and expertise as assets, engaging with families about what students are learning in the classroom and expectations for student success, and collaboratively identifying and seeking family input on strategies and resources for supporting student learning and growth in and out of school. We are really excited about this being an essential element. And we're actually going to be co-hosting a drop-in session with the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement on what it might look like to meet this expectation. It's going to be on December 5th from 10 to 11 a.m. And I did not, Sadie, if you wouldn't mind pulling that link, it doesn't need to be right this second because I forgot to put it in our links that she would drop, but at some point we will, during the session, possibly during the Q&A, we'll drop that link for you to register for that session if you're interested. During that session, we're going to be talking about what it looks like to meet the expectations of that essential element, how candidates can demonstrate that they have met that expectation, as well as input from the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement about the trend in this direction and why it's really important nationwide. Thanks, Lindsay. Okay, and then the last one is reflective practice. This was an old essential element, but there's new language. The new essential element reads, the candidate reflects on the effectiveness of instruction and how one's identities, biases, and practices impact student learning and well-being, and works to improve practice and eliminate learning inequities across race, gender, ethnicity, language, disability, and ability, and other aspects of student identity, such that all students can meet or exceed grade level expectations. And I'm going to hand it back to Lindsay.
Thanks, Kenzie. So those were our updates to the essential elements, which is the content in CAP. And now we'll talk about updates to the CAP process. There have been a few significant changes to the CAP process, which include evidence collection expectations, guidance on virtual observations, updates to the CAP form, and updates to the CAP observation form. So we'll go through each of those. One of the more significant updates to the CAP process is that evidence collection is now more flexible. As you may know, there are 5 categories of evidence in CAP, and there are the 7 essential elements. In these updated guidelines, 3 of the essential elements, subject matter knowledge, high expectations and support, and safe learning environment, must be observed at each observation. Other than that, the only requirements for evidence collection are that each essential element is demonstrated by at least 2 categories of evidence, and that each type of evidence is used for at least 1 essential element. There were also a few updates to the CAP form that we want to share. The first that you'll see is that there is a section where a representative of the sponsoring organization will complete a checklist that verifies that the sponsoring organization is aware of the qualifications of supervising practitioners in alignment with the expectations outlined in both our regulations and our 2023 program approval guidelines. If the sponsoring organization is unable to find a supervising practitioner that meets these expectations, as we've outlined in the program approval guidelines, it's the sponsoring organization's responsibility to directly support the candidate with additional resources, guidance, or practice to address those gaps. It's up to the sponsoring organization how they'll determine how you as a supervising practitioner meet those qualifications. And we've tried to leave that relatively flexible by saying it is a representative of the sponsoring organization rather than a particular role or individual, because we know each of your partnerships exists in a unique context.
Another update is for the allowance of virtual observations under certain conditions. We are going to be using the first 3 years of allowing these kinds of virtual observations to see what kind of data comes out of it and adjust the policy if needed. But currently, I'll read what it says in the guidelines right here, which is that programs that intend to conduct any announced observations virtually must submit a statement of assurance to DESE that includes a sample recording of a typical virtual observation and a description of how virtual observations will meet the following parameters. The parameters are: the teacher candidate is audible as appropriate and visible throughout the observation. Students are audible as appropriate and visible when participating in full class activities. Students working independently or in groups are visible during relevant portions of the observation. Student work from individual or group activities is visible during relevant portions of the observation. The recording reflects the full observation. No components of instruction are cut or edited, except as necessary to remove students without permission to be recorded. And neither of the 2 required announced or unannounced observations may be conducted virtually. If at any time during the practicum, a member of the triad, a supervising practitioner, program supervisor, or candidate requests an in-person observation to better support the candidate, that request must be accommodated. Most likely, our audience here is meant to be supervising practitioners. Most likely, you as a supervising practitioner will not be in a position of needing to conduct virtual observations, since you'll mostly be in the classroom, but it may be important to know if your sponsoring organization has submitted the documentation to do these virtual observations and if they're planning to do them, since the way that they are set up may affect the observations and may require additional planning for you if you're the person who's going to be in person, and for example, the program supervisor might be virtual. And again, we'll just use these first 3 years as a data collection period and analyze whether or not the expectations and the standards are being met despite the whatever nature the observation is in. Okay, so now we're going to talk about specific changes to the forms. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for just a minute so that I can pull up the observation form. Okay, so here is the observation form. There are a few changes that I want to point out. As somebody who will be doing observations, supervising practitioners will need to be familiar with this form. Like we talked about, there are required focus elements for observation. So those are the ones that need to be observed at each of the observations. So those are subject matter knowledge, high expectations and support, and safe learning environment. Here's the column where you can just say that, yes, you did observe those elements during the observation. Those should always be a yes because they're required to be observed. Optional elements, this is not optional in that they are essential elements at all. They're always going to be essential elements that have to be demonstrated, but they might not be demonstrated through an observation. They're likely going to be demonstrated by other evidence sources. It may be possible that you can observe some of these elements during a given observation. So if you happen to be able to observe them during an observation, you can put yes in this column, but sometimes this might be no. If your sponsoring organization has gotten approval from DESE and submitted all of that paperwork, and we've said yes, that's okay for you to do virtual observations, the program supervisor may be checking this box or one of these boxes, virtual synchronous or virtual asynchronous, or it may be an in-person observation. The format is the same. All of this stuff is the same as the previous form, whole group, small group, one-on-one. You'll enter the content topic or lesson objective. This active evidence collection box we've gotten some questions on. Previously, if you've done CAP before, you may know that in the previous forms, there was just a little text box on the form that said active evidence collection should happen on a different piece of paper, basically. People asked that instead of having the requirement to collect evidence somewhere else, that we just provide space on this Word document. So that's what this box is for. The intention is not that we are going to be assessing, as DESE assessing it in any way. It's just your own notes. It can be whatever you want. Space for synthesized evidence after you have done the active evidence collection can go down here. And then this is a change from the previous form, so that it used to be, Lindsay, what are the two R words that it was?
It was areas of reinforcement and areas of refinement. And we got some very helpful feedback that those two R's were confusing and that we did make the shift.
Which is completely understandable, and I completely agree. And so now it just says areas of growth and areas of strength and areas for growth. So you can enter what the area of strength is here, and then specific strategies or recommendations to continue to reinforce the strengths, and specific strategies or recommendations to improve these areas. So that's the observation form. And now, hold on just a second, let me stop sharing again. Okay, now I'm going to talk about updates to the formative and summative assessment forms. I'm just going to pull up the formative assessment form for now. Summative assessment form is pretty similar. Okay, so this is the formative assessment form. It is pretty similar to the formative assessment form from before. I'll go over the couple of changes that we made. So one of the changes is that there's this table up here, which
Can you
is,
zoom in a lot?
oh,
Candy?
sorry. Yes, thank you. Okay, so there's this table up here, which is the same table that we just talked about. But this is the one that is going to be filled out to indicate during the formative assessment which of the essential elements have been demonstrated by which of the types of evidence so far. We're going to talk a little bit more about quality, scope, and consistency in a minute. I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom. We have the updated essential elements here. That's the only change that's been made to this summary of ratings box. And then we have space down here for areas for growth, recommended action, or sorry, areas for growth, evidence, recommended action, and again, potential resources, guided practice or training to support the candidate in that area. And there are 2 areas for growth and 2 areas of strength. I just this morning have been fixing this form. There was a typo in it, so I'm going to upload this form. That's why you might see a slightly different form, but it will be uploaded in the next couple of days. But there's a very, very similar form on the website that's posted right now. Okay, I'm going to start sharing my slides again. Okay, so the next thing that we wanted to talk about is quality, scope, and consistency. If you've been doing CAP for a while, you're likely very familiar with quality, scope, and consistency in the way that we're talking about it today. So just bear with us, but it's helpful sometimes to just have a little refresher and get everybody on the same page. So on the CAP rubric, which is what I was just scrolling through in the formative assessment form, descriptions of teaching practices for each essential element are differentiated across 4 performance levels, which are unsatisfactory, needs improvement, proficient, and exemplary, differentiated by quality, scope, and consistency. Teacher candidates receive ratings based on quality, scope, and consistency separately for each of the essential elements. The definitions for quality, scope, and consistency are that quality is the ability to use a pedagogical approach or perform a teaching practice or skill effectively. Scope is the scale of the impact with students, the ability of the teacher candidate to use a pedagogical approach or perform a teaching practice or skill effectively in various classroom situations or contexts. And consistency is the frequency, once, sometimes, or always, that the skill, action, or behavior is demonstrated effectively. And while quality is one indicator of teaching skill and the ability that must be demonstrated during practicum, we know that proficiency in scope and consistency will continue to develop with additional experience within the classroom setting and across classroom settings. So for that reason, for a novice teacher to serve students well from day one, it's not necessary that they demonstrate full proficiency in each of the essential elements in quality, scope, and consistency. While candidates are expected to demonstrate proficiency in quality for each of the essential elements by the conclusion of CAP, candidates may be considered ready to teach with ratings of needs improvement in scope and consistency, which is why in that rubric you saw that the gray outlined boxes for quality for the essential elements were highlighted for quality and proficient and in needs improvement for scope and consistency, because those are our readiness thresholds for their performance. Something else that we wanted to highlight today was the emphasis on high quality feedback in the updated CAP. So we really want to make sure that candidates are receiving high quality feedback during their practicum. Being their practicum with supervising practitioners and their field-based experiences is a really special opportunity for them to make a large amount of growth in a really short amount of time, because they're being supported full-time by an experienced practitioner. In order to take advantage of that skill set, though, it's really important that they're hearing high quality feedback all the time. So high quality feedback, according to our definition, is timely, constructive, targeted, and actionable. Timely being that it's provided in a timely manner after the observation, and creating routines around formal, frequent informal, oral and written feedback in between formal CAP observations. Constructive being that feedback is framed in a constructive way, building on strengths in a supportive tone, avoiding a tone of judgment or critique. Targeted, meaning that it's communicated explicitly and directly, clear and precise, offering specific examples and evidence, and that the focus on CAP feedback is on the essential elements and the related practice. And actionable, meaning that the person who's giving feedback identifies a specific action steps for growth, such as evidence-based practices to implement, resources to consult, and opportunities for practice. So we really tried to integrate sort of those targeted and actionable parts into the written feedback portions. The timely and constructive are obviously difficult to ensure in forms, but we wanted to make sure that that those are being communicated throughout. High quality feedback in CAP is formally documented at 6 points. After the 2 announced observations, after the 2 unannounced observations, during the formative assessment, and during the summative assessment. During these times, high quality feedback is written. So even if supervising practitioners are giving high quality feedback to your candidates every day, it's really important for them to have written feedback in that specifically a written format, so that they can use it for personal reflection and growth, and so that they can use it as evidence for their growth. So please do make sure, as supervising practitioners, that you make sure that feedback, you write it down at these points in CAP, and that it's high quality and useful. So I just want to go over a quick example of non-example and example of high quality feedback. And this is from sort of years of looking at CAP evidence in our formal review process. We've seen a lot of variability in the quality of feedback that candidates are given. Oftentimes we hear that the quality of feedback that's given verbally doesn't match the quality of feedback that's given in a written way. So we just really want to emphasize that we do expect and we really hope that high quality feedback is given in a written way. So an example obviously would be great classroom management today, keep working on consistency. It's not targeted, it's not actionable. An example of high quality written feedback would be you introduce the new attention signal effectively, practicing the signal with the students before the lesson, communicate clear expectations. They remember the signal and followed your directions precisely. At the end of the lesson, students didn't freeze when you used the signal, so you repeated the signal rather than trying to talk over the students. This reinforces the importance of respecting the speaker. Reinforce this routine for yourself and your students by asking students to briefly practice the attention signal before your lesson each day this week. So that's an example of written feedback that's targeted and actionable. Okay, we are going to talk a little bit about CAP data submission this year. This is a little bit into the nitty-gritty of things, so just bear with me. CAP data submission, if you are going to do the updated CAP during this school year, so 24-25 school year, it's going to require a little bit of flexibility because of the way that our information systems talk to each other. So if you're using the CAP during this school year and you're using the CAP online platform, some of you are familiar with the CAP online platform already. It is relatively simple, but also relatively low tech. So you'll need to modify your submission by entering the information for the new essential elements into the boxes for the old essential elements. So the new essential element being inclusive instruction is going to need to go into the box for well-structured units and lessons. The new essential element, the information for the new essential element, collaboration on student learning and well-being, will need to go into the box for meeting diverse needs. And then if you're familiar with CAP before, you know that there are boxes that have to be, you have to enter some text because there was a more less flexible way in which we required evidence for each of the steps of CAP. So there are bolded boxes that require you to put some information into them before you move on from that page. So sorry, in that situation, you can just type in NA, and as long as there's anything in that box, the CAP online platform will allow you to move on from that page. This is also going to be similar process is going to be necessary if you deal with the data submission spreadsheets, which some of you do as opposed to using the CAP online platform. And if you use the spreadsheets, the same modification will be made. So in the columns for inclusive instruction, in the columns for the well-structured units and lessons essential element, you'll enter the data for inclusive instruction. And for the column for meeting diverse needs, you'll enter collaboration on student learning and well-being. We do have a quick reference guide about CAP data submission because it sounds very confusing even now when I'm saying it out loud. Sadie will drop that in the chat. It feels a little less confusing, I think, when you see it in writing, but just let us know if it continues to be confusing. The CAP online platform is going to be switched over to the new CAP. We're making the revisions now, and the switch is going to happen after the CAP submission deadline in July of next year, so sometime after July 15th. Just a quick word on implementation support that will affect district folks and supervising practitioners. We will be releasing QRGs very soon about quality, scope, and consistency and high quality feedback, which will have basically the same information that I just talked about in the next couple of weeks. We're also going to be releasing the updated CAP handbook, which the old version of the CAP handbook seems like it was really useful for folks. So this one we're also hoping is very useful. It will have some additional resources, some sort of more optional resources and guidance. And then very soon, next month, we're also going to be releasing videos. We're calling them videos, but they're really just going to be like recorded presentations that folks can watch asynchronously. They will be for specific audiences. So there will be one for supervising practitioners, and there will be one for candidates. So those will be viewable on our website asynchronously beginning in November. And then just a reminder, sponsoring organizations are going to be submitting their implementation plans that's tomorrow. So we will have a better understanding of what sponsoring organizations are going to be doing in order to ramp up for full implementation. And then this next year, they're going to be preparing for full implementation, including training and modifying coursework and starting to do CAP with the new CAP with candidates. And then full implementation is going to be expected during the 25-26 school year. I'm going to Stop the recording.